She hired a dying girl to teach her how to cry on command. What she learned instead changed her life forever, and when the time came to say goodbye, she realized she had become the student of the most important lesson she'd never wanted to learn. Victoria Sterling was Hollywood's golden girl. 28 years old with platinum blonde hair that caught every camera flash and emerald eyes that had graced 1,000 magazine covers. She was breathtakingly beautiful, impossibly wealthy, and completely empty inside. After a decade of romantic comedies and action films, Victoria had built an empire on her perfect smile and flawless face. But there was one thing her natural talent couldn't master: genuine emotion. "I need to cry, and I needed to look real," Victoria told her agent after losing another Oscar-worthy role to a lesser-known actress who could summon tears like turning on a faucet. "Find me someone who can teach me sadness." That someone was Emma Richardson, a 17-year-old girl who lived in a small apartment across town with her single mother. Emma was thin and pale, with dark circles under her bright blue eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hospital visits. Her brown hair had grown back in soft curls after her last round of chemotherapy, and though she tried to hide it with makeup, the effects of her terminal cancer were written across her fragile features. Emma had been fighting leukemia for 3 years, and the doctors had recently delivered the news that no family should ever hear. 6 months, maybe less. What Emma lacked in health, she made up for in spirit. Despite everything, she maintained a blog about living with terminal illness that had gained a modest following. Her writing was raw, honest, and heartbreakingly beautiful, full of the kind of authentic emotion that Victoria's performances desperately needed. Victoria's assistant had stumbled across Emma's blog during a late-night research binge, looking for real people who understand grief. The plan was simple: hire Emma as a consultant to help Victoria understand and portray genuine sadness for her upcoming role in an independent drama that could finally earn her the critical acclaim she craved. "I'll pay you $5,000 to spend a few weeks teaching me what real sadness looks like," Victoria explained during their first meeting at Emma's modest apartment. She sat uncomfortably on the worn couch, her designer clothes a stark contrast to the humble surroundings filled with medical equipment and get-well cards. Emma's mother, Sarah, worked 2 jobs to pay for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. The money Victoria offered represented months of financial breathing room. So despite her reservations about her daughter being used as an emotion coach, she agreed to the arrangement. "I don't want your pity," Emma said quietly, studying Victoria with an intensity that made the actress squirm. "If you're going to learn from me, you need to understand that sadness isn't a performance. It's survival." Victoria began visiting Emma 3 times a week, initially approaching their sessions like she would any other professional coaching. She took notes on Emma's facial expressions during their conversations, practiced mimicking the way Emma's voice caught when talking about difficult topics, and analyzed the subtle physical manifestations of grief and fear. "Tell me about the worst day," Victoria would prompt, her phone recording every word. "Describe exactly how it felt when a doctor told you the treatment wasn't working." Emma complied at first, sharing her stories with clinical detachment, while Victoria scribbled notes like a student cramming for an exam. But as the weeks passed, something unexpected began to happen. Victoria found herself setting aside her notebook and simply listening. She started asking questions not for her performance, but because she genuinely cared about the answers. "Why do you still smile so much?" Victoria asked one afternoon, watching Emma laugh at a silly video on her phone despite having spent the morning at the hospital for another round of painful tests. "Because the sadness isn't the whole story," Emma replied, her eyes bright with a wisdom that seemed too old for her 17 years. "If I only focused on dying, I'd miss out on living." Victoria began spending more time at Emma's apartment, not for their scheduled sessions, but because she found herself drawn to the warmth and authenticity that filled the small space. She helped Emma's mother with grocery shopping, drove Emma to medical appointments, and slowly began to understand that she hadn't hired a teacher. She stumbled into a friendship that was changing her in ways she never expected. The turning point came 6 weeks into their arrangement when Emma collapsed during one of their sessions. Victoria rushed her to hospital, holding Emma's hand in the ambulance and feeling a terror she'd never experienced in her privileged life. As she sat in the sterile waiting room, still wearing the expensive dress she planned to wear to a premiere that night, Victoria realized she was no longer acting out concern. She was living it. "I'm scared," Emma whispered when Victoria was finally allowed to visit her hospital room. For the first time since they'd met, Emma's carefully maintained composure cracked, and tears rolled down her pale cheeks. Victoria took Emma's hand, and without thinking about technique or performance, tears began flowing down her own face. "I'm scared too," Victoria admitted, the word surprising them both. That night, Victoria called her agent and withdrew from the independent film that had started this whole arrangement. "I can't do it," she explained. "I can't use Emma's pain to advance my career." But Emma had other plans. When Victoria visited her the next day, Emma was sitting up in her hospital bed with a determined expression. "You're going to take that role," Emma said firmly. "But you're not going to use my sadness. You're going to use your own." "What do you mean?" Emma smiled, the same radiant smile that had confused Victoria from the beginning. "You've been so focused on learning how to cry that you missed the real lesson. Sadness isn't about tears, Victoria. It's about love. You can't truly be sad unless you truly care about something outside yourself." Over the next month, Victoria threw herself into caring for Emma with a devotion that surprised everyone, including herself. She rearranged her schedule around Emma's medical appointments, spent nights researching experimental treatments, and used her connections to get Emma access to the best specialists money could buy. Victoria also returned to the film project, but approached it with a completely different perspective. Instead of mimicking Emma's expressions, she drew from her own growing understanding of what it meant to love someone you might lose. The movie wrapped filming just as Emma's condition began to deteriorate rapidly. Victoria spent every possible moment at Emma's bedside, reading to her, sharing stories, and simply being present in a way she'd never learned to be for anyone else. "I need to tell you something," Emma said during one of their last conversations, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wasn't really teaching you sadness. I was teaching you how to feel." Victoria squeezed Emma's hand, tears flowing freely down her face. Not performed tears, but the genuine expression of heart that had learned to break beautifully. "And I need to tell you something," Victoria replied. "You didn't just teach me how to feel. You taught me how to live." Emma passed away on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with Victoria holding her hand and her mother stroking her hair. Victoria's assistant had to cancel 3 meetings and a photo shoot because Victoria couldn't stop crying. Not the elegant, camera-ready tears she spent her career perfecting, but the messy, overwhelming grief of someone who had lost a piece of their soul. The independent film Victoria had almost abandoned became the most critically acclaimed performance of her career. She won the Oscar she'd always dreamed of, but when she stood at the podium holding the golden statue, she could only think of Emma. "This award belongs to someone who taught me that the most powerful performances don't come from learning how to fake emotions," Victoria said, her voice breaking as she looked directly into the camera. "They come from having the courage to feel them for real." Emma Richardson showed me that sadness isn't something you perform. It's something you survive. And if you're very lucky, it's something that teaches you how much you're capable of loving. Victoria never hired another acting coach. She didn't need to. Emma had taught her that the best performances don't come from studying other people's pain. They come from opening your heart wide enough to let the world break it, and then finding the strength to keep loving anyway. 6 months after Emma's death, Victoria established the Emma Richardson Foundation, funding research for childhood cancer and providing financial support for families facing terminal illness. She learned that the opposite of sadness isn't happiness, it's purpose. And sometimes, the most important roles we play aren't on screen at all. Never underestimate the power of authentic connection. Sometimes the people who teach us the most about living are the ones who are learning how to die. And sometimes the greatest performances happen when we finally stop acting and start feeling.